Centennial. We are week 8, part 1 of our broadcast. We're going to be talking about the first part of mean stack. And we're supposed to be doing full stack or mean CRUD. We're going to do the first part of that today, but we're going to start off by converting an Express server into an Express API. How do we do that? So first of all, what I want to talk about is what we're starting with. We're starting with a project that is lesson 6B. That's where we're going to start from. So if you want to download that lesson, that's on GitHub. You can go to github.com, Centennial College, and if you look up 6B, we're going to start with this one. So this is where we have, we don't have a mean stack, we have stack. And Express is a really quick front end. It's pretty good, but I think what I'd like to see with the mean stack is a full framework. And we talked about this. Angular is probably the most challenging framework to use. So again, we're going to be using and installing Angular. So if you go to Angular, we kind of did it last time before you guys went on break. And on Angular, this is huge, right? Angular works across all platforms. Angular can be used to build things like apps for Android and iOS. It does things like two-way data binding and a bunch of other really crazy stuff, but it's also the developer's framework, which means it's a little bit more challenging to set up and to configure, as you're going to see today. So what we want to do, we want to take our existing app. We have an Express app, and right now it uses a view manager, right? A view engine, and the view engine is EJS. We want to remove the requirement for a view engine, and we're going to have almost a separation of concerns again. So I want to take my server, which is my backend stuff, which this is going to read the database and give us JSON. It's not going to give us web pages anymore, right? And then what Angular is going to do is it's going to use an HTTP service to consume that data. It's going to eat it, right? It's going to take that data and then manage the data and produce good front-end front-end pages for us. That's what Angular is going to do for us, right? Again, we're talking at a very high level right now, and I'm saying that only because I know that I would need to spend like another couple weeks with you just on Angular. We don't have a couple weeks. We have hours, right? And I was supposed to do full mean CRUD with you today. It's not going to happen. I don't think it can be. I'm going to start with Express. And then what we're going to do from Express is we're going to do mean, the read part of mean if we can. And next week we'll do update, delete, and creation stuff. And then we're going to do some minor updates. So what I want you to look at is the final product. So if I kind of look at something that I've created for this week, I've kind of went ahead and made a simple app on Heroku. It looks like this. So if I log in, and I log in as admin. Actually, let's log in with the wrong password. I'm going to get a little thing that says error, failed to log in, and it'll go away, like a little flash message, right? However, if I log in properly, there. Oh, that was good. It just was delayed. I like that one. I did it like 3 times. So now I'm logged in, and if you notice that it gives me, hey, hello admin, or, welcome kind of thing. If I go to my contacts, I can see my contact list, and I can see what this looks like. The contact list has paging as well as sorting, right? So I can sort by name, last name, first name. I can see multiple page items, right, or less of them, right? So this is all happening with Bootstrap on the front end. Again, one of the popular frameworks that people use for the front end instead of Bootstrap is Material Design. I won't be using that. I'll be using Bootstrap because you guys have been learning Bootstrap, but I think Material Design is really cool too. So is what the app looks like. We're going to be separating it. This is running on Heroku. The front end is Angular, pure Angular, and we're using Angular 7 for this example. And the back end is Mongo with MLab, Express, and Node. Okay, that's what it says. So it's full mean stack app. Okay, that's what we're going to be building. So we're going to be basing it off this, again, this other thing, which is 6B. So here's our project. I'm going to start off. So please, if you haven't had a chance to do this already, please download your project for 6B. I'm just going to open that up on the desktop. So here's 8B. You guys are the B team. And what we had before, I'm going to review what we had before, so we're on the same page here. Again, I'm using Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go Control backtick, and what we're going to see here, I'm using, by the way, Git Bash. That's why it's all colorful like this for my terminal, as opposed to just regular command prompt. So again, if you look at this, what I want to do is kind of run it with NodeMon. So if I go NodeMon, we should get no error if we're running MongoDB in the back end. By the way, let's just do this. I can split my screen like this with the terminal, and I can do something like mongod on the back end there. Mongod. Okay, so that's running on 27017. And if I restart my server, it would normally work. The reason why this is not working is because this is trying to connect to that should work. Oh, also, I didn't install node modules. Let's try that. So npm install, you have to do that. And npm install will install my node modules that I'm missing. Otherwise, it'll never work. Let's try that again. There we go. We're good. And what does that look like? On the front end, we can look at it with local hosts. 3000. You can see that this is what we have so far. So last week, before we went away, we did this, and this is using EJS. We can still log in, right? As an example, here's login, and we can get some sample data. This is the sample data that I built today. Okay, this is DB and Express and Node. With EJS, we're going to add Angular. But in order for us to get there, and you can see that I'm going to keep these two windows open. This is our server side. This is MongoDB, and I'm going to add another one. And what I want to do is talk about how we're going to restructure this application. So there's a problem. One of the problems that we're going to have is security. When we set up our endpoints, and whenever we talk about routes like this, these are all of our endpoints, our for get and post stuff that we're going to be doing, all these different requests, they're considered endpoints. So we have an endpoint that does, kind of the slash or about endpoint. These are all nice and fine and good, but they're good for things we want to display. We're not going to display anything with the server anymore. The server won't be displaying any pages. So all of these endpoints will have to be disabled. Okay, that's the first thing. Also, from a security perspective, we were using sessions and we're using Passport Local. That's not going to be possible with security anymore. Why? Because the backend isn't going to have a persistent session. So we need to use web tokens, right? So there's other ways to do it too. But I'm going to be using something called JSON web tokens, right? Which is a totally different way of doing things. So passing web token, it's a hash 256 character token that the system uses to compare with a token that you're storing somewhere, normally in local storage on your browser. what the server is going to want. Why? Because HTTP is stateless, and we're not really constantly connected on the server. We're just making requests to the server, and it's a disconnected service. There's the server on one hand, almost like a microservice. We're not quite there. Next week, we're going to talk about that. You've got the server, which is totally separate than the client. Okay, so we're going to be doing that, and we're going to be creating an API, a RESTful API, by taking an existing Express server and converting it. And that's what we're going to be doing in this first video. Questions before we begin? All right, so again, I have a working model that I'm using, and I did this. Took me about a week to do. We're going to do it within. We're going to do it within an hour. Yeah, it's going to be, just the way things go, right? And I don't mean to be facetious. It's a lot of work to do, no matter who you are, to get this running properly with no errors. That's the challenge. And doing it live like this is really challenging. So again, we need to use something called JWT. I put a link on your on Slack if you take a look. So a couple links on Slack. One of them is jwt.io. These guys are managed and supported by Auth0 or Auth0. They're a big security outfit, if you will, and they take care of the JWT standards. So take a look at that if you're interested. But basically what they use is web tokens, and the web tokens allow you to authenticate who you are. So it's kind of really cool too, really cool. If you want to go extra secure, you'd want to use, JWT with some kind of two-step authentication as well, some kind of verifier token. Right? And so what happens is I have a server running on my machine, which is the back end. And then I have a server running on my machine, which is the front end. And these two servers are talking to each other on the same device. And devices don't like that. That could be like an attack, right? So what they do is the device on the back end will block the device on the front end. And even though they're on the same machine, they're going to say, I don't know who you are, but this is a weird kind of connection you're creating with the same IP address. You're blocked. So we need to kind of enable this idea, this ability for us to share resources across origin, right? So we're going to use cores inside of our Express server. If you haven't had a chance to download this yet, and if you haven't used it in other courses, please download Postman. Postman is a way of getting and posting requests or using messages without using a browser altogether. You can use a little app that basically allows you to send and kind of return information. It's not going to be as used today, but next week when we do authentication, we're going to be looking at tokens, and a lot of that stuff is stored and can be accessed through Postman. All right, so take a look at that. So that's one thing, and then of course this is the example app that we're going to be using. So lots and lots of stuff to do, and of course never enough time. All right, so starting off, we're going to go into the configuration part. The first thing I want to do is in my db.js. One of the things that we're going to need today is we're going to need a secret, because JWT requires us to store some kind of secret identity, if you will. You can call this whatever you want. You can use whatever secret you want, but it uses it as part of its hash. So I'm going to put a comma in there, and I'm just going to leave this commented out so we can go back and put it back in later. And I'm going to create this thing called secret, and I'm just going to name it. You can put whatever secret you want, like some secret. You can put characters, numbers, whatever you want in there. I'm just going to leave it as some secret, and you can decide. A lot of times we don't leave it in here. We use the environment variables on the server where it's stored, so you can't even see it here. Okay, typically. Anything like API keys and all that kind of stuff, you don't want to store in here at all, because then it'll be available to you on GitHub. And if someone can get your API keys on, they have access to your stuff. They can spoof being you. So again, secret is some secret. We're going to do this. This is the first part. Part 2, app.js. We're going to modify this pretty heavily. In order for us to do this, we're going to need a couple of resources. And if you look at our package.json right now, you can see that we have things to fix. So one, it's not 6B, it's 8B that we're going to make. We're also going to change my repository, which I'm going to put on right now. I'm going to make an initial commit with all this stuff. So this is 8B. And here's our stuff, right? I'm going to save this, and I'm going to start with this as a base, right? And I've already got a repository that I created online for this one ahead of time, just to save a little bit of time. And that's just 8B, which is kind of empty right now. Okay, so I'm going to take these this code here. I'm going to initialize a new repository. So git init, git add dot, git commit minus m. And we're going to say initial commit. Setting it off because I want you to start from kind of a fresh spot. And I'm going to grab these last 2 lines of code over here. Again, like I always do from GitHub, right click and then press enter. And that should at least set up our lesson 8B where you can follow along. I'm going to go fairly quick. Look at that. That was weird. I almost never get that. GitHub is super fast. All right, so we need to add a couple of additional things here in order for us to support JWT. I'm going to start with that. We're not going to use JWT today, but we're going to configure it. And the reason for this is because it's going to take some time to do everything, and I want to set up my backend so that the front end is ready to connect to it. Okay. Otherwise, we're going to try something out next week, and it's not going to work. All right, so you can see that I have Connect Flash. I mean, for now, we need Connect Flash because we were using the front end stuff, but Connect Flash and anything on the front end that we were using before, for example, jQuery and Bootstrap and all that kind of stuff, eventually what we're going to do is we're going to remove it from the back end altogether because you don't need one. Let's do some installations. This is new stuff for today. So again, I want to go npm install cores, which is that cross-origin resource sharing stuff. We want to enable that in our application, right? So we're going to add that in. We're also going to add in JSON Web Token. So JSON Web Token. We're going to add that in too. I'm going to put this a little higher so you guys can see it. There we are. Did I miss it? JSON. Right, there we go. There's another language. We also want Passport JWT because we're going to connect the JSON Web Token with Passport. So Passport, because we've been using Passport, might as well JWT. So those are the 3 new packages we're going to be using today. And again, I'm going to do minus save. Again, for the latest version of Node, you don't need to put a minus save anymore, but we do it just for completion, for completeness. And then we do this kind of thing. It's adding things in, and we're good to go. So we've got those 3 packages. Next, so this is all the stuff we need to change to make this work. I still also would like some support on the back end. So we know we have dependencies and we have dev dependencies, and the dev dependencies are there for us as developers. They're not going to stop us from producing our site, but we want to use some dev dependencies for code hinting and support. So again, I'm going to do an npm install, right? And it's going to be the things that we just added in. So at types or then at minus save minus dev for developer. And then those are 3 things we're going to add in, 3 packages. So far, so good. We've added those 3 things in. And again, if you go back to the other things, you can see that still running nicely. No problem. All right. Now what we want to do is we want to take these packages that we've added in, and we want to modify our configuration on our server so we can include them. So again, it's all the configuration on the back end that I'd like to do first. We're going to do some simple testing, and then I'll explain on the next video how it connects with Angular. All right, so again, if you think about this, I want to use cores cross-origin resource sharing. I want to say let cores equal to require cores. Right, so I need one of those. And then further down, what I have is a session and passport local. Passport local and local strategy and Flash. These three things, eventually, we're not going to need them, right? Because we're not going to use local strategy pretty much anymore. But for now, let's just go back. We'll make some space, and we'll put in the stuff that we need for today. So we need a new thing called passport JWT, right? Which is require, and again, it's passport JWT. So Java, JSON Web Token. That's what that is. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use that as an alias so that we can create some strategies and other things. So JWT strategy, which is equal to our passport JWT strategy. So that kind of looks at that one particular object. And then we're also going to say let our extract JWT object be passport JWT extract JWT. Those two things. Okay, so we've created kind of like some variables that we're going to use later on. Things to note. People asked me earlier today, why do we need to get rid of Flash? Didn't we need that for the, for sending messages to the front end? You're right, but this isn't the front end anymore, right? So we're not going to need this. We can actually remove that. We're not going to do it today. We're going to clean up. Remember how I work? I make it work, and then I do my cleanup after. Right? And again, I recommend that. I know some people like to clean up as they go, and then things don't work anymore. They're like, I don't know what I did. You cleaned up. That's what you did. Don't do that. Next. So as we go down, notice we have node modules. I've shared node modules because our app right now uses Bootstrap and Font Awesome and jQuery, and it's all in our node modules folder. We're not going to need to do that anymore after this because we're not going to use Bootstrap and Font Awesome jQuery on the back end, right? So for now, though, we'll leave it, and I'm telling you what we'll take out, but we need to do one thing which is very important, which is app.use cores. We need to enable cross-origin resource sharing, or else it'll just give us an error, right? So that's the one thing we need to do. Okay, now let's set up our passport stuff. So again, we have as we go down, we have our user configuration, which is right here. This gives us our user model. And then as we scroll down, you can see that we create a local strategy for logging in. Again, this will be something that we're going to be removing. So this stuff here is really, this part verifies that the token, the web token we're going to be creating, again, which is this hashed token that is going to be generated for us, right? Is actually being sent by the user. Is being sent by the user and is valid. That's what we're going to be doing. So this is what this thing does. So again, we're going to say that let JWT options, that's what we're going to say, is equal to some kind of object. Okay. And we're going to say that JWT options, we're going to add in JWT from request. It has to be typed exactly this way. JWT from request is equal to extract JWT. And this is one of the methods you can use. Take a look. If I go dot, here's options from header, from auth header as bearer token, from auth headers with scheme, from body field, from extractors, from header, from URL, query parameter. These are all places where you can get the token from. We're going to get it from auth header as bearer token, okay? And we're going to store this in the authorization part of our header, okay? And we need to use this as an object. Okay, so that's the one we're going to set up. JWT options dot secret or key. That's what we're going to use. db.secret, the one we just set up. Okay, so that's part of our, we've set up or configured our JSON Web Token options. Okay, now that we've done that, we're going to create a new strategy. So we're going to say that the strategy we're going to create is equal to a new JWT strategy. And we're going to pass in, like it says, the strategy options, which is our JWT options. And the what we want to do is we want to set up an object that has two things, something that I want to call JWT payload. And the JWT payload is going to include the user information that we're going to compare with, which is going to be a callback function. All right, so JWT, you can call this, you can use whatever names you want here. Okay, this isn't required. You don't have to use JWT payload. But think about this as the user payload. I'm going to share username. I'm not going to share password. Do not share a password with your token that's a negative, right? That's like, and besides, our password is already super hashed. So it's going to be you're going to store a hash and you're going to rehash a hash, and I don't recommend it at all. Just saying. So that's just one. So, and you don't, and that's going to be stored. Your actual password is going to be a clear text password that's going to be stored pretty much inside someplace like local storage. I don't recommend it at all. So please don't pass your password around. So this is the payload. And then we're going to have a callback function that is just called done. Don't worry about what this is. You can call this whatever you like. And like it says, done is declared, but its value is never read. Think about this as the verified callback. That's what it is, right? So as we go in here, we're going to start doing it. We're going to look at the user object. We're going to say, hey, user, I want to find a user by ID, right? And I want to find by ID my JW, my payload. So here's my payload, basically the user information. And I want to look at the ID property of the user information. And that's what I want you to find, okay? And now that you find it, I'm going to use a promise. This is something that's part of ES6 and forward. I can say, okay, fine, you got them. But then what I want you to do, here's the callback when you're completing that task. After you've got them, I want to take the user information as an example, and I want to return the information back to the calling function. So I'm going to do this by returning the callback, which we've called done, and the user information we've collected from the payload, which is part of the token, back to the calling object, whatever that is. However, if there is an error, we want to catch it, right? And we're going to catch the error. We're going to have an error callback that's going to return something. It's like I'm recalling two versions or returning two versions of my callback function. I'm making a reference to a callback function that I'm creating here live. It's called done. That's what we're calling the call. You could have called this A or foo, whatever, right? But this callback function is going to have two properties. And the first property is going to be the error property, and the second property is going to be the actual object that we're sending back. Notice in the first return, we're sending back null. There's no error, and we're going to send back the user information. And the second property, when there's an error, we're going to send the error, and we're not going to send the user information. Okay, that's what we're doing. And that's what this local strategy, this little JWT strategy does. By the way, just to let you know, in terms of time frame, this, to figure it out, to make it work, this is going to work for this application. What about if I wanted something different, like this? It wouldn't work, right? So the other thing we have to do after we've configured the new strategy is we want to attach it to Passport. So I'm going to say passport.use, and we're going to attach a new strategy as strategy. And now Passport has both the local strategy as well as this stuff, which uses JWT. Are you with me? So this is just configuration stuff. Next, let's check to see if that broke anything. So again, I always like to go back and look at my server. Looks like we're good. Next, well, this is nice. It would have been nice when my Express app was not an API. We could use these nice routes, but right now it is an API. It's going to become an API, and the convention when we make an API is we use the keyword API. I know it sounds like bizarre and weird, but yeah, we do. So we need to do this. We need to put in API, and I'm actually changing the routing, which is going to change everything, right, when it comes to our front end. And this would be API/contact list. We're going to add API whenever we want to do something. One thing to note is this is not going to be a protected list. I'm going to use JWT later on next week when we get to it. For now, I'm going to put a little to do, right, which is, protect this section. So I'm not going to protect it now. Normally, between this route and the router itself, I can put another check that checks to see if the user's been authenticated. And if they're not, it'll just bounce them out. It'll redirect them back to like a login page or something, right? But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it so that we can test with it. Because it's going to be tough enough without authorization to do what I'm going to do today. Forget authorization. We're just going to get 400s all the time, which is like not authorized, or 401s. Okay, so this is the one part I'm going to do. The other thing that I like to do is I also want to capture, and I will do this next week. So another piece of the puzzle is I want to have another to-do, right? And I want to be able to need to capture kind of like random links, like some other kind of link that the user is going to put in, right? So random links or incorrect URL information. I want to capture it and I want to send the user back to the home page, right? This kind of thing all the time. And I'm going to do that by creating a kind of a catch-all that's I'll do that today, but I'm going to have this as a to-do for next week. All right, and then after that, we're pretty much good to go from this side. So I'm going to save this, and again, I'm going to check to see if my router is still working. It is. Everything is good. My server. We're good to go to the next part. So that's the configuration for app.js. We've configured everything in the config file is done. Now we're going to move on to the routes. So again, like we said, from a routing perspective, these are all the endpoints. We don't care about displaying any of this stuff. We're not going to display a home page anymore, right? We're not going to display any of this stuff, not even the login page. But the posting of the login we're going to do. So let's just comment this stuff out. So the stuff we don't need, I'm going to, well, actually I just comment each line because I've got these other things there that's going to stop things from happening. So I don't care about this one or this one or this one or this one, and all the way to like that one. That messed that up. I'm trying to do it one at a time, but of course, so I don't screw up. I could do it a different way too. This one we need. So this is a post. So this one here, this is processing the login page. We're going to need this one. So this particular endpoint login, we're going to need this one. Register. This is displaying the register page. We don't need that part. Don't need this part. It's really weird. It's like clicking is weird. And then we do need to register, to process the register page, and we do need the user to be able to log out. So those are the endpoints we need. I'm going to save that. And let's go back to the other routes for contact. So contact is interesting in that we need them all. But I'm not going to use a require authorization here. I'm going to use something else. So I'm going to get rid of this for now. So all the require auth stuff that I did to protect each route, I'm going to protect the entire section from the on the server side, right? So I don't care. I mean, I can do root level authorization for each endpoint, but I'm going to basically do it globally. I'll globally block this whole section. So we don't need those. I do need a couple of additional things though, because I'm going to be doing routing. I'm going to be using JWT. So for both routes, index, as well as contact, I need to configure, I may have to configure things a little differently. I'm just going to check to see I've got everything because I don't want to miss that stuff. It can create problems later on. Yes. So on the contact side, what I want to do is I've got my Express, I've got my router, then I got Passport. And what I want to do instead of just using that is I want to let JWT is equal to require. Again, it's JSON Web Token this time around. This is where I'm using it for the first time. And I may have to access this later on. Right now I don't, but when I do my authentication and authorization for each little page, I'm going to have to access JWT. So I'm going to put it in there so we don't have to do it next time. Okay. This require auth function is going to be rewritten, so it's going to do what I want it to do. I'm going to put it back later on. Okay, so that's that. Any questions around routes? So again, why do I need all of these? Because each one of these routes does something that's meaningful for me. Okay, and we'll talk about even the display ones. The display pages are we want to stop the display pages from working, right? So for now, we're going to use the getters. Eventually we can kill them, right? But for now, if someone tries to access these pages, I'm going to give a kind of a response that says unauthorized. That's what I want. All right, going back to controllers. Remember, the controllers connect to the router, or the router connects to the controller. Just like I said before, display home page, display about page. Let's just get rid of all this stuff. But first, what I always like to do is just verify anything that I need. So I do need a couple of things here that are new. So I got passport, and I need to use JWT again. So let JWT equal to require, because of authorization again, JSON Web Token, right? Notice I'm using it here, not the passport passport JWT. That was for the server side, right? And then I also want to get a reference to the database again, my database config, because I'm going to use my secret. So I'm going to say require ... config /db. So I need those two things. This is just my database, so I can, when I look at this, I have two options. One is it changes everywhere. All right, so that's cool. But now this other stuff that I've done, like these pages, I'm going to kind of comment them out, right? I don't need my display page, my about page, my display products page, all this stuff, display login page, but I do need to process it. So I'm going to take it just down to this. So my process login page I do need. My display register page I don't need. So I'm going to get rid of that logic altogether, so it's not loaded. My process register page I need, and I definitely need my perform logout page. So those are the things I need for authorization on the index.ejs page. I'm going to come back to this. Let's do the same thing for my contact controller. My contact controller, you can see that, again, from a contact perspective, what I want to do is I want to make sure JWT is part of JSON Web Token. Okay, so that's what that does. We still have our contact model. Anything else? That's the first change. But the display contact list, the display ad page, all this other stuff, I'm keeping in this case, right? I'm not getting rid of it. So how do I modify? Let's go back to my index.js page. How do I modify this to make any sense? So what do I really want to do? So my login page isn't going to display a login, but it's going to return a response back to the calling server or the calling front end that's going to say, you've logged in. Here's your token. That's what it's going to do when you log in now, right? So I got to be able to give a token back to the calling service. I don't have that information. I don't have that functionality here. And so we have to build it in. Our user and any kind of other information. The info is really being largely ignored. If there's an error, we're going to just return an error. We're going to stop. That's usually some other weird error that we're going to get here, right? How about if there's no user? If there's no user, we had this thing where we would request flash, but there is no flash now, so we're going to get rid of this. So that goes bye-bye. We're simplifying, because that would have displayed a flash message on the back-end EJS views. We're not going to do that anymore, so that's gone. What about if the user logs in? If the user logs in and it's good, well, then if we have an error, we're going to return the error. But however, what about when we don't? So I'm just going to kind of put some space in here. So when we don't have an error, what I want to do is I want to create this payload. So my underscore ID, as well as display name, which is user.displayName, and then username, which is user.username, and then finally email, which is user.email. So what I'm actually doing is I'm getting this user information from the user that's being used to log in, the information that I'm getting from the post request. So the post request is going to post stuff from the body of the form that that's going to come here, right? And the body of the form just need this basic information. You can actually ask for less. Like I said, you could ask for only the ID and the display name, and that might be enough, or the email or something like that. You don't have to have all this stuff. I like to have it all from a demonstration purpose perspective, but your company policy might say otherwise. Okay, next, once I've created the payload, I want to create a new token from the payload. So I want to make something called an auth token. Again, this is the name I used. And I want to use JWT, this is where I'm using it for the first time, to sign this token with two parts. One, the payload. So the payload is something that I'm going to feed the token, right? So the token is going to be created from the payload. I'm giving it user information. It's going to take that user information, hash it up, protect it, and kind of create it in a token. And I'm also going to give it my secret. That's going to be the other part of the hash, right? I also want to configure it a little bit. I'm going to say that I want it to expires in some kind of time frame, which I'm going to give it in milliseconds. You can see that this is part of the things. I'm going to say that in 604,800 milliseconds, which is roughly a week's time, right? It's going to expire. That's the token. I've got my token. That token came from the payload. The payload came from me trying to log in. I logged in. I gave the user information, username, and password. It retrieved the username and password from the database. And when it retrieved it, it created my payload for me. And now what I want to do is I'm going to return this payload back to the calling application so it can be stored in local storage somewhere. So then I can compare my token that I have access to something that's going to be on the token to go. The last part is before we're returning this redirect. We can't redirect. We're not going to redirect. We're not going to display a page from this. So we're going to get rid of this. And what we're going to do instead is when we return stuff out of here, we're going to say that we're going to return response.json. And we can just do this, just response.json, and that would be okay. But what we can do is we can configure the response a little bit more intelligently. We can send back a success property. Hey, are we successful logging in? Yes. Respond with true, right? And then we want to give a message that says the user has logged in successfully, right? So user logged in successfully. So that's what we're doing here. And I also want to pass back kind of thing. Now we could use the other information that I've had here before, but I find that it's just easier for me just to put it back in here. In fact, what I can probably do is just do one of these copies. It's like another page. It's like kind of a payload configuration. I could just pass back the payload, but I'd rather do this. And then what's going to happen is after that, another option is going to be that I want to pass back the token. So I don't just pass back the payload, but I also pass back the auth token. This is all being passed back to the calling function. So for example, on Angular, I'm going to have a function that gets called, that goes to my my endpoint, which is the login endpoint. The login endpoint, if it gets the right information, is going to send back a token back to the calling service, whatever that is. Usually my auth service that I'm going to create on in Angular, right? And I'm going to pass back this information. But what about if I fail? So we didn't really handle that. Normally what we do is we redirect back to login, but there's no redirect, remember? We're not going to redirect anything. So let's just do some of the same thing. I'm just going to copy this line of code right here, right? And just up to there, let's say. So instead of redirecting, I don't want to redirect, right? That would be bad. What I want to do instead is I want to do success is false. So we didn't make it. We get a negative kind of success. And the message is actually going to be an error. It's going to say something like, what did I do wrong? Oh, yeah. It's going to be like this. It's going to be something like error, failed to log in. We don't know why you failed to log in, and we don't want to tell you why, right? And we don't know if it's because your password log in user, right? So we don't want to tell you why. It could be your password's wrong. Could be your username is wrong. If I tell you it's the wrong username, you can, we talked about this before, you can keep hacking at it until you figure out the right username. If I tell you it's the wrong password, then you know what the username is, and I can hack the password. So you don't want to pass that information back, typically. Are we good? So do you understand this part? All right, so that's really the process login page portion, right, where we kind of say, hey, this is the the username and password, they're logging in, and so on. And that's really login in a nutshell. What about registration? So we do want to process the registration page. That's the next part. So that's down here. So again, this stuff stays the same. We get a new user. We take it from the body of the form, whatever that form is going to be. We pass it to the register function that's built into Passport Local. Again, if the user exists, we want to kind of respond saying there's a problem, kind of something like that. And then this request flash thing is useless. So we're going to get rid of that. No more request flash. However, this part here, which is request render, and we're going to go back to register, this makes no sense for us. We're going to get rid of it, and it's going to be a failure, right? So again, just going back up to here, I'm going to grab this failure response, which is this. Okay, I want this because it's going to be a pattern that we're going to be using, right? So I'm not going to redirect anymore, but there's nothing to render. I'm just going to respond with this. I'm going to say that, hey, return response success is false. And we're going to say, for whatever reason, you failed to register the user. Failed to register user. We don't know why. Maybe it's the same username. Maybe it's some other thing. You didn't put it in. And we want to be more specific here. You can be. Like sometimes what happens is, in this case, the user exists, but that's bad. We've told you that the user already exists, right? And the more information I give you, the worse it is. But what about if you're successful? I want to kind of grab this thing here. And if you're successful, then I want you to return not this, right? But actually, I'm going to say something like, hey, you're successful. So the message is going to be true. You logged in. Everything's fantastic. And the user registered successfully. We're going to say that the user, right? User registered successfully. Yeah, there, yay! Exclamation marks all the time. Exclamation marks all the way down. All right. That's it. So you notice that I took away so instead of no good. Okay, next. Here, this logout service is good. We're going to perform logout, this part, but the redirect, no. So we're going to do one of these. We're going to take a positive thing, which is this one, positive message. And we're going to just like put it in here, and we're going to do a res.json where we say success is true. We got the wrong one. It's okay. And the message is going to say the user logged out, successfully logged out user or something like that. So user successfully logged out. Okay, no exclamation. We'll put an exclamation mark. Put exclamation marks all the way down, right? Just because. Bad form anyway. All right, so you see what we've done. We've converted what we had before, which was a bunch of messaging. Let's fix the contact now, contact.js. So very similarly, we're going to do the same thing. Where we have these messages, we're going to do in the contact controller. It's going to be very similar to what we've done here. So again, where this res.render is, this part's okay. It's going to be display the contact list. This is the one we're going to try and access today as much as possible. We don't want to do a res.render anymore. We want to kill this. We're going to say res.json, success is true. Success is true. And the message there's not going to be really we could return a message if you want, like successfully displayed user list. This is for a lot of times what we do here is, and hear me out, we use a message for debugging, right? Because we can say, okay, the message is successful, right? So contact list displayed successfully, right? That's the message. But we also want to carry back our contact list, the actual contact list object itself, which is going to be called, please remember this, we're going to use it later, contact capital L list, right? Which we're just going to use from the contact list that we have here, okay? And then we're also going to pass back the user information, because that's important sometimes, where we're going to get the request.user, and we're going to pass that back as well when they log in. Why? A lot of times we want to take that information and we want to make sure that the user that's already logged in is the user that's authorized. Okay? So it's kind of a trick. I'm passing back the user. I already have the user, but I'm passing it back and comparing. And if he's not authorized, I'm not going to let him look at the list. Right? Again, for today, there's no authorization or display contact list endpoint. I want to do the other ones. I know this is kind of a slog because we're going to do everything over and over again, but it's good to see it, and from repetition perspective, it's pretty cool. So again, in our display ad page, the success is true. We display the ad page, and then we're going to say successfully displayed ad page. Again, this will be appearing displayed ad page. Okay, so that's going to happen. If we had an error, which we're not checking right now, we could also check to see that it didn't display. Here's the process ad page. So processing is different than displaying. And what we're going to do here is when the process happens, we're going to create a user or a new contact. And then when we create it, we're going to have this res redirect again, right? And the res instead of a res redirect, what we're going to do is we're going to do a res.json, a response JSON, and we're going to respond true with the message. The message is going to be successfully added new contact. New contact. There we go. Okay, so that's happening. That's the process add page done. Okay. Okay, display edit page. You can see where this is going to go. I'm literally going to just kill this part right here, right? We're not going to show anything. We're just going to return a successful message that we're going to say successfully displayed the contact edit. Edit, return that information, which is the contact object. That's the contact that I got from the database, all right? Again, think about this as using it for debugging purposes. I'm using messages and it's carrying information. Later on, we can simplify some of this stuff. All right, so now we're going to process the edit page. So once we've got it, we've got a new user, we want to process it, we perform the update, but we're not going to redirect. Hell no. What we're going to do is we're going to just send a message that says, hey, we're successful. We've successfully edited the contact, and whatever that contact is. Edited contact, and we want to pass back that contact information, which is the contact, which is the updated contact. Okay? Does that make sense? perform delete. If everything goes well, we're going to respond with a JSON object that says, hey, we're good. We successfully deleted the contact, right? Whatever that contact is. Now we have a lot of latitude here. We could pass back information to the calling method as much as we want, which is awesome. That means we can pass information from the back end to the front end. If I can pass information from the back end to the front end, I can pass objects, variables of different kinds, classes, all kinds of things that I want, right? Or just basic text like I'm doing with the message. Okay, so questions around these endpoints. So really, we're done. The back. You're gonna ask the login every time that you're not authorized. If you're not authorized and you don't have a web token, right? If the web token doesn't agree, it's going to check to see if the web token exists in your local storage. If the web token doesn't exist in your local storage, it's going to ask you to log in. If you log in, it's going to store the web token in your local storage. And every time you go to a new site, it's going to check to see local storage to see that you're logged in. That's what it's going to do. So every page that you move to, because remember that HTML is stateless. It doesn't know about state. It doesn't connect. It doesn't have a connection state where we're connected or not. It doesn't do that, right? So we have to kind of make sure that the backend knows that the front end is authorized. Okay. Let's test it. So we've done this part, but we haven't tested it out. How would this look? So, well, if I go to the front end now, if I go refresh, we're going to get this 404. So when we go to 3000, that's no good. But what about when we go API/contact list? Well, we'll get this. Right? API/contact list. We're going to get a response with JSON data. That's what it will look like. Okay. The tool that I talked about before to use sometimes is Postman. So if I look at Postman, you can download that at the link that I provided. Right? What this tool does is it's very similar to making requests, if you will, without a browser. Okay. So notice over here, I have a post option. This is how it works, right? I have my post option, and I can do something like this, where it says, okay, so I want to access my localhost 3000, and I want to do my contact list. So I want to kind of look at my contact list. So I can type that in. I can say API contact-list. And then if I press enter, then it'll return if there's a problem, if it's a 404 or whatever. So here's my contact list. I did a post, right? And what did I get? I got a 404, right? If I change this to get and I do a send, I'm going to get my contact list. I can see what my contact list information is going to be. So guys, this is a really cool tool because, and if you haven't used it before, in that I can send information as if I have a form. I don't have a form. I don't have a user interface, but I can test the back end by sending the proper information that it's looking for, right? This is great for testing. So if you haven't had a chance to get a copy of Postman, I would download it if I were you, especially when it comes to authentication. Are we good so far? This is a great place to stop this recording. I've got my backend. Looks like it's pretty good. My API. An API is a programming interface, right? So I can look and say, okay, here's my API. Well, I want to edit, as an example, this object. I want to edit this guy. Is that how the API works? And if I press, get, if I do the get request for this, it's going to give me 404. If I do a post request for this, it's also going to give me a 404 because we have to make sure that the API is correct. So should it be API edit or should it be API contact list edit? Contact list edit. And you can see now when I do that, the reason why the post request works is I'm trying to process this page, right? values in here to get information. If I go and do a post, what I can do is to simulate, oh, let's change this Clark Kent from 36 to 35. How would that work? So what we want to do is we want to go into on top here. When we do our, so again, there's a couple things that I want you to see. I can go into body, and under body, you can see I can go into raw, right? Here's raw. And you need to have this stepped up to JSON, application JSON. If you made it something else, it wouldn't work. And then what I can do is I can physically change these values here. So I can say, well, my first name is Clark, my last name is Kent, my age, let's say, is 40. So let's change that number, right? Notice that the original number was 36. And if I click send, it's going to do a post request with this information. When I do that, if you look back now, that's why Postman is pretty cool. Questions around converting an existing Express app to an API, which is what we just did. Great. Let's pause the video. When we come back, we're going to start Angular and how to start consuming Angular with an HTTP service. We're going to use Angular to consume Express API with an HTTP service. Whew.